Good morning, everybody. Good to see you this morning. We got a few visitors with us also. It's good to have you with us as well. If you want to turn your Bibles over to Hebrews 11, we are, if you've been with us, picking up on a series of lessons on faith from end of chapter 10 and into chapter 11. And our goal here is to do what I believe the author of Hebrews is doing, is define faith for us, explain faith for us. And he uses these people in chapter 11 that we will often call the Hall of Faith to show examples of what that defined faith does indeed look like. Let's do a little recap of where we've been thus far. We talked about how a couple of weeks ago, faith requires a destruction of your old life, that it can't be that I get to be David for forever. It must be, as Paul would say, Christ living in me. And so my life is forfeit, it's gone, and now the only thing that I'm left with is a confidence in God, which pushes me forward, and as the author mentioned, into this undertaking of faith. And so as the beginning of chapter 11 starts, let me go back here, it is the assurance of things hoped for. The Greek word is hypostasis. It's the idea of getting up underneath, standing up underneath something, the expectations of faith. You'll recall that we started each of these lessons by saying that faith is the hardest thing that God has ever asked of anybody, and He has asked it of everybody. And so it is an undertaking. It is a hard thing. And by doing that, you then show the evidence of unseen things. And we saw Noah be an example of that. Noah had never seen a flood. Nobody else had either, as far as we know in the scripture, seen rain at all. But Noah moved. He lived and acted based on unseen things. And so it was a demonstration of faith. We also talked about last week how faith is a proper trust in God's reward. And the reward that Hebrews 11 tells us is that it is a good testimony that God gives. That's the reward. The author of Hebrews doesn't really talk a whole ton about heaven. In fact, we'll get as close as we will to that today. But he talks about how remember the Greek word is martureo, in the dying to ourselves, God gives His testimony that we were faithful people. That is a hard thing to do. But again, God expects that of everyone, a proper trust in His reward. And if you have all those things together, if your old life is gone, if you're living a new life only in the confidence of God, you are being brought forward into a future hope that you get to enjoy almost all the benefits of right now too. This is to say, at least for the starting, that having faith means that you are looking for home, and that what home is, or at least is how we would imagine heaven, is, as the scriptures sometimes speak to that, is about walking with God. And you can do that now, and you can do that for eternity. And the only thing that's between now and then is a little thing that we call death, which the Hebrew author does not put very much stock or value in. It's this small thing. And so let's continue our lessons then by taking this hope for the future, a faith that we have in that the future will come about as God has said it will, and understand that He has made it so that we can live that way right now. We're going to see two primary examples through this lesson in Abraham and Lot, his relative Lot, and his wife's lives. So let's go ahead and turn to chapter 11, verse 13. And we got to talk a little bit about hometowns, because if we're talking about looking into the future, I don't know if you're the same way as I am, but the future is scary because it requires changes of things. I don't like change. And so the future is full of these unknowns and what's it going to be like? And I can expect that it's not going to be like just how it is right now. And so many people prefer nostalgia, the other side of that. The past does not change. It's locked in the past. And so we have views about where we came from and the experiences that we had, and we will often color those with a rosy tint to them. And many of us have talked about this recently. Ecclesiastes says that it's not wise to go back to the former years and say, why were those better than these? Because sometimes we're not taking it all together, and we're not putting the full picture together. The old times had as much difficulties as the future will have if it continues on as it has. But often we look to our hometowns, and I do say, I think I can say that I hope that you all had a good experience of your hometown and where you came from, and that you do have some fond memories from there. That's part of what comes along with when we say, well, back in my hometown, we assume certain things that hopefully had gone very well. But for the person who has destroyed their past, we used the analogy a couple of weeks ago, ran out of the burning house with the one thing that they could take with them, a confidence in God. Hometowns don't have as much meaning for that person anymore. It's just a place and a time and a past that I understood in my own past was full of sin that needed to be removed. And so when we look at hometowns and their comparison or their influence in the lives of the faithful, we get to see several people all lumped together in verse 13, where it says here that all these died in faith, without receiving the promises, but having seen them and welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed they were strangers and exiles in the earth. Let's go through this verse in order for just a moment. The idea of having welcomed the promises from a distance is very interesting to me. I have in this picture of my mind these people we're about to describe, Abraham and Moses and Noah that we talked about last week and others, and them seeing the promises afar off, and let's personify those promises like a person that you're getting ready to see, maybe a family member that's coming to visit, and you see them way off there and you're waving and they're waving and we got a long ways to go until we get together. But the idea here is like you're here and we're shaking hands even though you're all the way over there. And how can you do that? Are you there or are you here? And that's a little bit of an insight into how faith looks at things. God made a promise to these people. And many of these people, in fact, the text says all these mentioned up till now, had died without ever seeing that promise come to fruition. So do they, as they're going on their deathbed into the grave or whatever, do we kind of proverbially say that they say, well, God can keep his promises or anything like that? No, they welcomed them from a distance. They knew that it was as good as now, even though they didn't see the exact fulfillment of those in their lives. We'll get back to that in a second. So what did they do in the meantime? Well, they didn't gripe, or at least they didn't gripe very much. Some of them do, and they get corrected. But they are committed to God and his promises. And so what it says here they do in verse 13 is that they confess that they are strangers and exiles on the earth. This is not like I'm just a wanderer. I hate it. I'd rather live in a mansion or things like that. But here I am in this tent, and so I just kind of gripe all the time. That's not the confession we're talking about here. This is a person who is proud that they are not from here anymore. This world is not my home, we say. We're just a passing through. The idea is we confess this is not my home. I'm not from here. I don't think like here. I don't derive the way I look at the world from my past. I look at that through the lens of a confidence in God through Christ. And so if they confess that they're strangers and exiles, we understand they don't have a home anymore. They are homeless. They got no place to be. One of the things I think is kind of interesting when you see people in the political discourse, and sometimes you'll see people say, I don't know if I can vote for this person or that person, and have you ever heard the term politically homeless? And that's kind of the idea where it's like, do you have any connection with anything that's going on? How about we make a connection with a home that you've not been to yet, a place you've not been to yet? We have a word for this. It's kind of a strange word. It's, let's see if I can find it here. It's enomoia, which is the idea of nostalgia for a time you never lived in. And I wonder if you've seen that before. I hear people talk about that. I read a stat recently that they did a survey of people from all the way to the boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and so forth, and they asked them, what is the best style of music, the best kind of music? And everybody agreed 80s music was the best. And so it's funny that I did not live through that time. Maybe you have, maybe none of us have, whatever the case is. Everybody agreed, that was some good sound there. And that's kind of the idea almost, is like this nostalgia for, I never listened to that stuff. I never had one of those records. But you're looking back to this past, or you're looking to maybe a reality that you would want to be a part of if you could, even though you never were or haven't been yet. And so that's the idea here, is they were confessing they were strangers, meaning they are homeless now, but they are looking for a home. And a part of this means that they can't look back. Let's look at verse 14 here. It says in the next verse, chapter 11, verse 14, for those who say such things, make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. One of the things I've noticed in the years that we've moved, and you all have moved at various times as well, is that often it's probably a good idea to downplay that I'm not from here, at least for a little bit, till I understand how things work in the area. But these people, when we're talking about living in the world, they make it clear. I am not from here. I don't have your customs or your culture or your way of thinking. And this is an excellent lesson for us as Christians, that to be one of the faithful, remember, God requires faith of everyone. We can't be mealy-mouthed about letting people believe that we're like them or from here or think their ways. We can't be quiet or whisper, or they say, hey, where are you from? And we go, California, sort of thing. We can't do that. We have to make it clear. I'm not from here. You'll recall that for people, even in this section, like with Abraham, there were times where they also tried to downplay that they were foreigners, and it always got them into trouble. And so when they realize and they commit, they make it clear. They make it clear they're seeking a country of their own. Some of your translations will say, make it clear that they're seeking a homeland or a hometown. And that is very interesting. The word in Greek is patrida, which is like fatherland is the idea. You think of pater, which is father in Greek. It's patrida, is a fatherland. It's a homeland or a land of my fathers. In fact, it's where we get the Greek word, or where our word comes from, a Greek word patriotes. A patriot is one who is concerned for the land of their fathers, is the idea. And so these people are the true patriots. They are seeking a country of their own. They're seeking a land of their fathers, a hometown. Let's go to verse 15. It says, indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. There's a group of people all around the world that we call expatriates. It's the same kind of root words there. And that is people that are from another country, that have moved to and are working in another country, but technically their passport and all this stuff is back there for their home country. They are expatriates. They are people that have left the land of their fathers, is the idea. And so here he says that we all are in some way coming out of an old country, but if we keep thinking about home, and home is the world, we're going to find excuses to go back. It's hard to live in a place that is not your home when you're from somewhere else, unless you commit, unless you change your nationality, unless you seek a better homeland. Famously, Cortez, when he came to the New World, the story goes, burned his ships so that his men would not even think about going back. If they're there, you can always say in the back of your mind, you know what, if things get hard, we can always go back. And then things get a little hard, and then it gets to things that are easy. Like if it just rains bad, I'm going back. I remember family members, and maybe you've had family members too, that when they're really close to retirement, the phrase was often, just one bad day, and I'm just done. I'm over with it. One bad day, and you and I'll go back if we think we have an option for that. So he says, if they were thinking about that, they'd have opportunity to return. One of my favorite movies is Apollo 13. And there, Gene Kranz, the mission control director, is famously quoted as saying, failure is not an option. And I believe that he even drew that from, I think Eisenhower had said that as well at some point. The way of thinking like that is the way of thinking of the faithful. If we lose in this Apollo 13 disaster, people will die. Therefore, we can't think of failure or giving up as an option. Do you remember at the end of chapter 10, he says, we are not those who shrink back to destruction, but we are those who bring up the undertaking of faith in chapter 11, verse 1. We are not those who consider failure an option, a homeland to go back to. Our life, our old life, is gone. It's dead and buried, to use Paul's analogies in Romans. And so what do the faithful do then? Well, they don't look back. They confess they're strangers. They are looking forward to a better country. Let's go to verse 16. He says, but as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. That is to say, one that's origin is heaven. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. If you think about, if you kind of put it this way, that each faithful person is going through their own wanderings, their own exiles, just like Israel in the past. And they're aiming for a place that God has made, and he tells us that he has built this. He promises us that it is there for us, with him, dwelling with him, that he is not ashamed of those people who are doing what the rest of the world would say is a goofy thing, wandering your whole life. For what? For what good is it? What good is living like a Christian? Because we're all just going to die. We're moving across the wilderness to the homeland, and God is proud of us. He's cheering us on, almost like a father to a child who's just taking their first steps. Come on, come on. We don't look at that child as someone who's silly. We look at that someone who is striving as much as they can by faith in the arms of their Father. And so they come to him, and he is not ashamed of them. I want to take you to two places here for a moment. Put a marker here. And let's go over to Revelation chapter 21. In verse 10, Revelation 21 and verse 10. When we're talking about things where it says here it's a heavenly country, which is kind of interesting. It doesn't just say just straight out heaven. It says the faithful are pursuing a heavenly country. And that is not because it's just super nice to live there and it's, beachfront property everywhere or anything like that. It is because this city is founded by, it's built by, the heart of it, the center, the plaza, is God himself. And so I hope that we would never think, and the faithful in the scriptures have never thought, that heaven was like a place where now I just get to be done and have all the goodies that I left behind in this life, whatever those might be to you or you or you. The faithful look for their homeland, their fatherland, because it is the land where Father is, and they want to be with Father. So go to a place like Revelation 21 here towards the end of that book. And of course, Revelation is full of symbolism, so see the symbolism in this. Verse 10, it says that he carried me, that's John, away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and he showed me the holy city. And this is really what the Hebrew author is talking about. It's Jerusalem. Is it the real Jerusalem, like the physical one over there? No, it's the real Jerusalem. Let's keep going. Coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, as a stone of crystal clear jasper. The city is personified as a she. And as you read the context here, you'll see that she is adorned as a bride. She is the bride. And we get messages to that earlier in the scripture, like Ephesians, where the church is Christ's bride, adorned with his glory. And it says here that she has all these characteristics, mainly having the glory of God. Why? Because he dwells in and among her. And so when we look to people like in Hebrews 11, and it says that they've left their old lives and they're pursuing that heavenly city, that city that is of heavenly origin, they are looking forward to the dwelling with God and his people. And for you and I, that's as much now as it is eternity. Let's keep going to another place here. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 12. I do have this on the board too. Hebrews chapter 12, back closer to our context. The Hebrew author says that you've not come to the old law. His point here is we didn't just come to Christ just to go back to doing the things of the law of Moses. Those were to point to Jesus. And so as Christians, those who don't shrink away, but those who have an undertaking of faith, you have come now, verse 22, to Mount Zion. But that's not Mount Zion. It's a metaphor, right? You have come to the place where God has always met with his people. As he continues, he says, you've come to the city of the living God. It's his town, the one he built, the one he invites the faithful to. Notice also it says, and to the myriads of angels. You've come to the dwelling place of angels. Again, once more, look at the beginning of verse 2. This is past tense. You have come as Christians. You have arrived to this place. Verse 23, you've come to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven. And who else have you come to? You have come to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. Back in chapter 11, verse 13, it said that all these died in faith without having received the promises. But as he'll get ready to say in just a little bit in chapter 11, you and I are there. If you come to God by faith, we have come to the holy city that God has built and prepared for those who love him. Now, we've got two options at this point. And I'd like to take you to Genesis 13. We've got two decisions. It's the same two decisions that the author of Hebrews made back in chapter 10. Are we going to be those who go back, Or are we going to be those who push forward? And I'll let you decide as we look at a couple of examples of people who did these very things. The first example we're going to talk about is Lot and his family, which incidentally, actually not incidentally, probably on purpose, are not included in Hebrews chapter 11. But they are an important lesson of the term he used of those who shrink back or those who kind of find their way out from underneath the expectations of faith. So to talk a little bit about this, we have to go to Genesis 13 and talk about Lot. Lot is a relative of Abraham. He's his nephew. And when God had told Abraham to leave from his hometown and become that stranger in exile, he brought with him some family members. And there's a little bit of a problem here because God told him not to do that, but he did, and it comes along with some consequences. We can say, I think very positively, as the Hebrew author will say, that Abraham did what was right eventually, but it took a little pain along the way to get there. So let's try and learn our lesson from that. As they come to the land of promise, the land of Canaan, we get to have some problems. Let's go to chapter 13 of Genesis, verse 1. Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, which is kind of south of Canaan, and he and his wife and all that belonged with him, and Lot with him. Now, Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and gold. He went on his journey from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, and to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly, and there Abram called on the name of Yahweh. Now, Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. And the land could not sustain them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great, they were not able to remain together. It's a great blessing to have this wealth, but it can also be a curse. And so as they've been blessed in this way, it says there in verse 7 that there's now strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock, and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling there in the land, and so Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen or your herdsmen. We're brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I'll go to the right. And if to the right, then I'll go to the left. I'll take whatever it is you don't want." That's very generous of him. So in verse 10, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, and it was well watered everywhere. This was before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Spoiler alert. But as we keep going, the next line, like the garden of Yahweh. This is like the Garden of Eden. It's as good as can be. Like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. And so Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. And thus he separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley, and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against Yahweh. Look at a couple of things that have happened here. They're trying to pick a home, a place to live. And so now that they've come here, Abram very generously offers Lot the first pick of wherever, and he'll try and do with what else remains. And so Lot chooses a life, he chooses a home that makes good fiscal sense. A lot of people, when they move to places, find a job. That's the first thing. I got to find where I'm going to work. And then later we start thinking about, well, what if there's a church there? Or what if there's something that I can do in God's service there? And that's just, way down the line. Lot is given this opportunity, and he goes, obvious choice. Look at this place. In fact, a little later on in Genesis, you'll see that this place is called the Valley of Siddim. And as we already read, it is an amazing place to live. There is, as Genesis will say in a couple of verses, no Dead Sea anywhere here. It's the Jordan Valley, the Valley of Siddim. It is a wonderful place. So he makes a decision that makes good monetary sense, but as he goes down there, we immediately begin to see that just because the grass is greener and just because you can earn a better living there does not mean this is a better life. He has enough sense here soon to recognize he makes a bad decision. We can go over, I'll read this for you very quickly. This is 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. The New Testament, looking back on history, says that God rescued righteous lives, making a point how God can rescue who God wants to rescue. And about Lot, he says that Lot was oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men. For by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. Sometimes that feels a little bit like just looking around us right now. You can, at any moment, be able to get videos from Twitter or wherever about some of the most heinous things that happen all around the world. And you see just enough of those and you go, I'm done with this. God, bring judgment. Or as Paul would say, Maranatha, Lord, come quickly. We can't keep going on like this. And so to Lot's credit, while he chooses to move down here and maybe didn't do enough research, when he is here, he recognizes this is a terrible, terrible place. His soul was tormented daily, it says, by their lawless deeds. But even though you can recognize that, we have the metaphor of the frog in the boiling water. You've all heard that before. You don't put a frog right, if you're going to cook a frog. Who's going to cook a frog? I don't know. But you put a frog in warm water and you turn up the heat. And in that way, the frog gets accustomed, you've all heard the story, to living in its own death. Now look at what Lot does in Genesis 19. Down into verse 16, God, you'll recall, comes down and appears to Abram in some form with a couple of angels. They have a discussion that he says he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abram goes, but Lot's living in Sodom. And so he tries to convince God to not destroy the city, but God is acting decisively. This injustice is too great. So he sends his angels down. The angels come and knock on Lot's door and say, we got to get out of here. And look at verse 16. It says, but he hesitated. Why? Because I made a home here. What are all the reasons that people do that when it's so clear it's time to go? I made a home here. My kids have friends here. What am I going to do? I'm going to lose my pension and things like that if I move from here. And so he hesitated, even though he knew this was a terrible place. And by God's direction, I believe, these men, of course, they are appearing as men. We've been told in the text already, they're angels. They seize his hand, they grab him, and they grab the hands of his wife and his kids, and they get them out of there. This is not up for negotiation. And it says here that the compassion of Yahweh was upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside of the city. And when they brought him outside, one said, escape for your life. Don't look behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the valley, escape rather to the mountains, or you will be swept away. It's very interesting. They say right after this that he kind of complains. He's like, oh, that's a long way. And so he says, can't we go to this little place over here? The word that he would have used is Zoar, and the text tells you that. They named that town Zoar because that means it's just a little place. And so they're like, can't we just go there? And by most archaeologists' records, if you look at the Dead Sea today, there is this little kind of outcropping, a little peninsula out into the sea where they believe is where Zoar existed. It's like the one high spot in that whole valley that is not the mountains. And so he says, can't we have to run that far? Lot, you do not understand. Your life is about to burn down. And if you try to argue this out, you will not survive. He mentions very literally here, but of course we can learn a lesson. Do not look back. And many of you know what happens next. In verse 23, it says that the sun had risen over the earth, and then when Lot came to Zoar, then Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Yahweh out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But his wife, from behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. This outcropping here, they don't believe this is actually this, but they call it this. They call this Lot's wife, this pillar outside of the Dead Sea. And just because it is a salt and rock combination pile that is in some way an interesting visual testament to looking back on a life of destruction that's been removed from them. And about somebody who thought, you know what? That's actually my hometown, and would have, at least for a moment, preferred to stay. The faithful do not look back. And when God is salting the earth, we should recognize there is no hope there. The only real option is to press forward. To not just be content to stay where our whole lives have been, because that's who I am, and that's where I come from, and that's what we do here, but to press forward to the mountain where God lives. let's go talk about a good example here. And we're going to take us back to Hebrews chapter 11 and to verses 8 through 10. And here we're going to talk about Abram. He is included in this list because he commits to a confidence in God. It says here in verse 8 that by faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. That, of course, shows you just how much he trusts God. By faith, he lived as an alien in the land of promise and as a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for a city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. If you want to get a little more of the detail, you can read about it in Genesis, end of Genesis 11, beginning of Genesis 12. And what it appears to be going on there is that Abraham was living in what we would have called Babylon, if you were later on in Israelite history, in the land of Ur of the Chaldees, and that's Proto-Babylon. And God tells him, get out of there. And they do for a little bit, but there's an interesting family issue that happens in that Abraham's brother, Haran, dies there. And God told him, you need to get away from your father's family. And Abraham leaves the city, but he doesn't leave his family yet. And so they take their deceased brother with them, and they go up north in Mesopotamia to like the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates. And there they create a town that they name after his deceased brother, Haran. And I think you can read in between the lines there that there's a lot of sentimentality happening here. There's the death of a loved one in the immediate family. And I can imagine that it would be hard to say, well, I got to go now, Dad. But I just lost my other son. You can't leave me too. And Abram stays there in Haran for a bit. And so he doesn't listen fully right away. But to his credit, he does eventually. And so then he finally does leave. And Lot does come with him. And again, God told him, leave your father's family. Lot comes with him. We got problems there with that. But then he does come down. And so the Hebrew author picks up here with the main point of the full story. Abram was eventually convinced, was assured by God, and he acted in such a way that he went to go seek a better homeland, not having any idea where that was going to take him. Let's go to Hebrews 11 and verses 17 through 19. So not only did he press forward, even though it took a bit, he was committed. In fact, Jesus says this for just a moment. Jesus gives a parable about two sons, one who says, I'll do whatever the father asks, and decides not to eventually, and the son who says, no, I don't want to do what dad asks, and then eventually comes around and decides to do that, and says that the latter of those two sons is the better of those two sons. And so Abram's following in this line, and sometimes it's hard to commit, but you've got to at some point. And so let's read verse 17 here. It says that by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. Let's stop there for just a moment. We already know about Abraham that he was willing to destroy his old life, to leave it all behind, to go who knows where, wandering in a tent for the rest of his life. He destroyed his past. But now what God had asked him to do in the offering of his son, if you're familiar with the account, is he's asking him to destroy his future now, too, at least what an earthly, worldly person would view as their future, my descendants, my heritage. And so Abraham is willing to go all the way. And there's something to this as well, that when you read back through the account in Genesis, in fact, let's go to, put a marker here again if it's not already there, let's go to Genesis 22 and verse 7. Genesis 22 and verse 7. As you're turning over there, I'm going to remind you of what Hebrews 11:13 says. All these died in faith. They did not receive the promises, but they have seen them and welcomed them from a distance and had confessed that they were strangers and exiles in the earth. This is Abraham, and he is admitting and fully committing to the idea that he has no life here anymore, past or future. When they're going up to the mountain, Mount Moriah, its name gets changed later on to Mount Zion, which is a very interesting turn of events over their history. But if you go to verse 7, it says that Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the land for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked on together. This tells you a couple of things. This is not Abraham trying to gloss over a painful reality that Isaac won't be able to understand yet. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to lead us to believe that Isaac is probably in his late teens, maybe in his 20s. It's not like, Dad, where's the firewood? He is strong enough to hold all the firewood to bring it up to the mountain. And so him asking these questions is him connecting the dots here. And he knows full well what's about to happen. And when it talks about how Abraham binds him and puts him on the altar, any normal person is not going to do that without putting up a fight. Especially, I'm thinking if I'm Abraham's age, I'm 100 and something, and I got my teenage son who does not want to be tied up, my teenage son ain't getting tied up. So Isaac knows. Abraham knows. And that line at the end of verse 8 is not him lying. It's not him looking at this in rose-tinted glasses. It is a full committal. God provides. And whether or not he knows how that's going to work out, whether or not he knows about the ram in just a few verses, or whether he thinks that that's going to be Isaac himself, he trusts. God provides. Verse 15. The knife is in the air. His son is on the stone. And the angel of Yahweh calls to Abraham a second time from heaven and says, "By myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." And Isaac wasn't killed, and a ram was provided. And both the Hebrew author and the author of Romans and Paul will make the point that Abraham knew that even if he killed Isaac, God could bring him back from the dead and give him the promised descendants. When Abraham goes, as Genesis says, to the grave, full of years and satisfied in life, is what the passage says, he did so knowing that this life was not about, and the promises of descendants was not about, just a little plot of dirt and this one child he got to see of that future nation. He looked to his homeland where God dwells, and he was there. Let's go back to Hebrews 11 and verse 39 as we finish. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 39. If it says, as we read earlier, that all these faithful people, Abraham included, welcomed this promise from afar off, Abraham was living in about as close to heaven as anybody can. He knew God is faithful. He is there with him today. And so in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 39, it says, "All these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God has provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect." What's that mean? Well, it means that in their faithfulness, they're going to be made perfect. They're going to be granted everything that they lacked, that is, those promises they didn't see, in the same way that you and I are, by faith, through Christ. And so that in the resurrection, their claim to fame in the hall of the faithful will be the same that ours will be at the end of our lives. It is Christ who lives in me. Who does live in you? What's the place that you've come from, and where are you going? The author of Hebrews is showing us you can't stay here for forever. Nobody makes it out of here alive. And so we choose to give up our past, place our whole confidence in God, and walk with him. And death is no barrier at that point. Make the future a reality now by trusting in the Christ, the gracious one who is able to remove your sins, if you've not done so today. If you've not acted on that faith by showing it through baptism, you can do so this very moment if you're willing. If you have any other needs, if you need prayers from the saints, if you need any help or encouragement, please let us know. The faithful want to help other people. If you have any needs, please let us know as we stand and sing together.